Welcome to the Private Practice Pro podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping therapists cultivate success. Here's your host, Kelley Stevens.
This podcast is sponsored by Simple Practice. I've been using Simple Practice since 2016, which has helped me run a smooth and profitable private practice over the years. It has simplified everything from scheduling to billing, giving me a better balance between the work I'm so passionate about and the family time I'm not willing to miss out on. Check out the episode notes to get a free 2-month trial of Simple Practice, my preferred all-in-one HIPAA-compliant solution. Welcome back, everyone, to the Private Practice Pro podcast. Michael, I'm so excited to have you on, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself because I'm just going to. So tell us who you are, where you're sitting, and all the things.
Thank you, Kelley. Super excited to be here. You know that I'm such a fan of you and your content. My name is Michael. I am a marketing professional that specializes in the mental health space. So I spent my entire career working with mental health companies, and I currently live in Providence, Rhode Island.
Awesome. Okay, so I was trying to think of when we met. I think it's been a few years now, right? I mean,
yeah, I think we connected on Instagram. I don't know how, if you came across in my For You page or collaborated with someone else that I was following, but I definitely, appreciate all of the work that you do to help therapists with the business side, of being a therapist, which is the space that I operate in as well.
Yeah, this is a space you're an expert in. So, and I know that you tend to not toot your own horn. So I'm just going to give people some background that you've worked with Gottman, you have run your own consulting company, you're working with Herd, which is also a leader in this space, and you've worked with some big companies in the mental health space, specifically in the business side, in marketing. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about email marketing. But maybe you could just give us kind of the background of the last few years of the companies you've worked at and the roles you've had with them so that we can give listeners kind of some context into who you are.
Sure. So, I had the opportunity when I was an undergrad at the University of Washington in Seattle to intern at the Gottman Institute, which was, such a cool internship for me. And honestly, not something that, I was seeking, right? Like I wasn't looking to, necessarily go into the mental health space. I hadn't heard of, John Gottman or his work prior to that. And just was like completely, in awe of the catalog of, the 40 years of research. And so it was really amazing for me, one, just to like dip my toes into the, the mental health space that way. And then, worked on a variety of projects as an intern, particularly around standing up a blog for them. They offered me a full-time role when I graduated from college. So like fresh out of college, went to the Gottman Institute full-time. I was there 8.5 years. And so helped to build up the company and, the brand into a lot of, what you see today. So social media, their website, content, all of that.
And obviously you weren't an intern that whole time. You got promoted a bunch of times.
I was able to, work my way up, was the chief marketing officer by the time I left. And one thing that I heard over and over from therapists during my time there, whether it was at a workshop or, I was at a conference, therapists would come up to our table and ask like, hey, who runs marketing here at Gottman? And, they pull me over and like, hey, do you guys do such an amazing job. Like, do you work with therapists? Like, I'd love help with my marketing.
Right.
And I'd always say, I'd love that, but it's not something, it's not a service we provide.
Yeah.
It's also not something that, I just have time to do.
Right.
So it was always like in the back of my mind of like,
right.
I think there's an opportunity here to help therapists with marketing. So in 2020, like right at the beginning of the pandemic, I took the leap, started my own business. And initially was helping therapists with marketing. And I did that for a year or so. And then that evolved into working with startups and tech companies in the mental health space as well, which is how I landed at Herd, where I am today. And so, I've had the opportunity to work for, like a larger company. I've worked with therapists in private practice. I've worked with, group practice owners, and now, at Herd on the kind of the tech side. So I've really seen a lot, all serving therapists in various capacities.
The whole realm. Okay, so for anyone who isn't familiar with Herd, because like sometimes I think therapists, especially who are listening to this podcast, are individual private practice. We might associate the word mental health tech with some not so good things, and I think Herd is, I always like to say, like one of the good guys. So can you tell us what Herd is, so that also we can give people some context?
Yeah. So, our mission at Herd is to empower therapists, not to employ them. So what we do is, we serve as the financial back office for therapists in private practice. So anyone who is in private practice or going into private practice knows the financial side can be pretty intimidating, right? If you've never done your own bookkeeping before, if you've never done your own taxes before, if you have to run payroll, all of those things are things that you're just not taught in graduate school, right? And suddenly, if you go into private practice now, you're a business owner too, in addition to all of the work that you do with your clients. And there really isn't a lot of support on the financial side, and so that's where Herd operates.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, so anyone who is in my private practice roadmap course gets introduced to Herd, because I think it's a really good starting place for people when they're first opening their business. This is one of the biggest challenges I see for therapists, is really figuring out all of the things you just said: the payroll, paying taxes, setting up the financial back office, integrating what if they're using Simple Practice, let's say, how to print the reports out and send them to a bookkeeper, like all of that. And I like Herd because you specialize in working with therapists. So the software we use, that like a lot of us as therapists don't love finances and that sort of thing. So I think it's good because I know, like previously, before Herd even existed, I've worked with CPAs and accountants and payroll people who don't know anything about private practice. And it's a totally different animal than any other sort of business. And I think it's nice to have people who work directly with therapists. So, okay, so now we've covered, you have worked the whole spectrum. So you have worked Gottman, you've done your own company, you've worked with individual solo private practitioners, and now you've worked on the business side of mental health and in tech. So we kind of today, before we got on camera, I was saying to you, like, we could probably we could talk for like the whole day about the industry as a whole. But specifically today, I think one thing people might not know about you is you run a very robust email newsletter. And I think it's something that we want to kind of hone in on today. So can you tell us about the email newsletter, how it evolved, what it is, how people can get on it, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I mentioned that at a certain point in my business, I made the decision to pivot towards working with mental health tech companies as a marketing consultant, and moved away from providing marketing services directly with to therapists. But I still wanted to serve therapists and provide guidance on how to market their practice. And so that's when I decided to start a newsletter. It was really just like a side project. I had all these kind of ideas and things that I'd learned over time. And I found when I was getting on the phone with a therapist, like I was repeating a lot of the same things. So I was like, okay, I just want to get this knowledge out to the world. And so I started an email newsletter. It's called Therapy Marketer. And it was like loosely based on, the premise that it's going to be delivered weekly. You can read it in 5 minutes or less. And every email is going to have like a tangible takeaway. It's going to provide value, something that therapists can implement in their business. And this is something that, we did at Gottman as well. I was really inspired. I'm dating myself, but probably like 2013, 2014, 10 years ago. You think about like what email newsletters used to be, right? It was like literally like a newsletter, like a bulletin that you'd see on like a bulletin board that was just like delivered in an email, right? And so there was like, newsletter companies that were popping up. The Skim was a big one at the time.
Yes. Oh my God, I forgot.
And the premise of the Skim was like the news should be skimmable, right? Like people don't have time to read, a newspaper cover to cover, right? Or even like look at the New York Times website and read all the articles. But what if like there was a, newsletter that was delivered that had really skimmable, digestible content? And I just I love that premise. So I applied that to the work we were doing at Gottman. Like, what if we sent a skimmable regular newsletter about, marriage and relationships? Each edition is going to have just one takeaway. And we actually, like, our goal was that it could be read in a minute or less. So we called it the Marriage Minute.
Oh, wow.
And people
you're a marketer at art. Right?
People loved
alliteration
it. Like
there.
I would travel with the Gottmans, and people would come up to them and say, "We love the Marriage Minute. We read it every week." They'd point to me and they're like, "Oh, it's that guy." So, going back to therapy marketers, the same concept, right? Like, I'm a huge proponent of brevity in marketing. I think that everyone is busy, has short attention spans. Right. And so, if we can deliver content that's short and concise and valuable, that's content that people actually consume instead of just scrolling on by it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think like so often I see people send out these newsletters that are just like huge, that are like 15-minute reads. And I'm like, this is like not going to work.
Right. Totally.
So did you end up using some sort of software or some sort of email marketing platform or no?
Yeah. So when I talk to folks who are interested in starting a newsletter, you want to start with your audience first, right? Like your target audience is, always within any kind of marketing initiative, like where you want to start. You want to decide on like a topic, what are you writing about for that?
Right.
And then you need to decide tactically, like, how are you going to send it? I think MailChimp is a great platform. They have a free version. I always recommend that. I actually use ConvertKit for Therapy Marketer. And the reason that I went with ConvertKit was that I follow the CEO on Twitter, and he's just such a huge proponent of creators. It's really built with creators in mind. So, you have the ability to sell courses and do other things. Whereas MailChimp is kind of like more general. And so,
I used MailChimp for a while. It's funny. Like I used MailChimp in my practice, I think maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And I use ConvertKit too. I feel like we could really nerd out on ConvertKit, but we'll spare people right now. And I agree with you. I think it's like, it feels more creative to me. There's some, room. Sometimes I get a little confused, but other than that, it's good.
I would say like, if you want to start a newsletter, don't get caught up on the tech or the tools. Like just pick something, whether it's MailChimp or ConvertKit. Substack is another option that has popped up, in the last few years.
Yeah.
I think you can always switch later. Don't let that be the thing that, you're like, not sure, what to pick.
I think one question I get from people a lot of times is like, how do you get people's email?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I know what I would say, but I want to know what you would say.
Yeah. So there's a couple of strategies, right? Like one is when you first start out, really leveraging your network and connections and contacts. So that's what I did. Like when I first started my newsletter, I decided this is going to be for therapists and I'm going to talk about marketing. Right. So I reached out to every therapist that I knew and I said, hey, I just started this newsletter. You can sign up.
Yeah.
So having a network already gives you a head start, right? Similar to launching your therapy practice. Like if you already are very well connected and you've done networking, like it's easier to get referrals. So that is like what's going to get you from, 0 to 1. I think like understanding that it's not going to take off right away. I think when I talk to people about building a newsletter, it's a 2 to 3 to 5 year investment, right? Like it's long term. Same thing with social media. Like it's not going to blow up overnight.
Right.
So I think like one, just being patient, and just like believing, in the process, and enjoying it too. It's something that like, if you're going to be writing a weekly newsletter for 3 years, it better be something that you're interested in and want to talk about. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I think like a lot of times we will say on my team, like email's not sexy. Like no one wants to write the email, like we all want to like make the reel or like film the YouTube video. But the thing about email is you own the list,
right?
Which like cannot be stressed enough, So like if I get hacked on Instagram, God forbid, that I can't even think about it. Or like some other, like Instagram owns those, not owns the followers, but they own that data. Whereas when you have an email list, like that's you, those are your people, like you have direct contact to them. And I think a lot of times people underestimate the power of email because it's not necessarily giving you that instant gratification that social media is. But like we often will say on my team, email is what sells, So not that should be your only goal, but
right. So in marketing, we talk about the difference between an owned and a borrowed audience, right? Okay. And so building an audience on Instagram is really building on borrowed land, right? Like you don't own your audience on Instagram. If Instagram, was bought or goes under or whatever, like we're seeing that on Twitter, right? Like Twitter was bought and it's algorithms and things are changing. And, I saw that when I was at Gottman on Facebook. Like we spent a lot of time and energy and resources into building an audience on Facebook, and it was like overnight reach just plummeted there. So with email is considered an owned channel or owned audience, right? Like you have direct access to people's inbox. And the engagement rate is so much higher, right? Like I would rather have 20,000 email subscribers than 100,000 Instagram followers, because with any one Instagram post, I might reach 5 to 7% of my audience, right?
Right.
Unless it goes viral, which you can't depend on. But
which happens once a
So having that owned audience is critical. And
I mean, it can't be stressed enough. Like I see in our email sequences for my business, like we assume that about 1% of the people that follow on Instagram or TikTok or whatever are going to buy from us. Whereas in our emails, like it's way more than that.
Yeah.
Because those people like are people, we're nurturing them, we're taking care, and it's, I can't stress that enough. So,
hey, therapists. Are you listening to the show and thinking, I really want to launch my own private practice, but I have no idea where to start? Make sure to check out Kelley's Private Practice Roadmap course. In the course, Kelley gives you the exact steps you need to open your own thriving practice. You can find the link below in the show notes.
And just going back to your question too, of like, how do you grow your email list, right? So like you've established it, you've told your friends and connections about it, and it's like, okay, now what? And I definitely went through a phase where I had 200 subscribers for my newsletter for like 2 or 3 months, right? Where it was like, I felt like I was just sending to the same people every week. It wasn't really growing. And what really was helpful for me was actually investing in distribution through social media. And so I decided, okay, if I want to like be serious about growing this newsletter, I need to grow, my audience. And I, looked at options for which, channels to invest in on social media. And, as someone who, is a writer, I decided that Twitter felt like the lowest lift for me, right? Like I didn't have to create video content for Instagram. I didn't have to create like graphics and visual content. Like I can like write tweets. And so I had a lot of success growing my following on Twitter, which directly resulted in people signing up for my newsletter, because every week I was like letting my followers on Twitter know, hey, like I have a newsletter going out. So I was able to grow my newsletter through growing my Twitter following, which was helpful, right? Because you do have to like be able to get it out and let people know about what you're doing.
Yeah, just like a podcast or anything. I mean, that's how we grow a podcast. Same thing. What about how has Twitter changed for, I'm sure you get this question all the time, but how has Twitter changed for you in the last year?
It's completely different. Once they rolled out Twitter Blue, which is their form of like verification, that you pay for, I noticed as, someone who doesn't pay for it, like the, reach and impressions of my tweets drop significantly. And it just also, there's like, I feel like they've loosened the kind of security and there's a lot more bot accounts, it feels like. And I just feel like a lot of people, that I was connected with on Twitter have left for other platforms. And so, it's unfortunate because I think there was a really great community there of therapists.
Oh, totally. There was a huge therapist Twitter. Have you thought about joining a different platform? Or are you on a different platform?
I honestly have felt myself more on LinkedIn recently. And I've started to see more therapists on LinkedIn.
A lot. Yeah.
And I think for me, like I know that I should be more active on, Instagram and TikTok. And I think for me, it's just a content creation thing of, creating, video content that's, it's engaging.
I know it's a whole beast, and like it's not like you have a full-time job and a whole life.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
It's not like you have to do that for a whole company anyway, right? So just kidding. You're a busy guy, and I would imagine that the idea of creating daily videos when you already have a huge email list and a full-time job and a consulting business might be a little bit like too much.
Yeah.
So I understand as somebody who does do videos every day, I'm like, oh man, this is a lot. This is definitely a lot. If you don't need to, then don't. I mean, oftentimes I'll tell therapists that same thing of like, I think there's this assumption for us as professionals, like, oh, everyone's on these social media channels, I have to be on them. But if your business is fueling and being moved and doesn't need Instagram or TikTok, then why do it? Like, why add on the extra labor if that's not what you need,
Yeah.
So I like recently started using Threads, and this is what I was wondering because I've seen a lot of people go to Threads, and I think that I think we're all still trying to friggin' figure out what Threads is.
Yeah.
So this is January 2024 right now when we're recording this, and I'm still trying to figure out what role Threads plays in my business. So I don't feel like it just replaced Twitter, by any means.
Yeah.
So
I've seen
but
so
maybe
many
in a year I will.
Of these, social media apps come and go over the last 10 years that I'm kind of hesitant to jump on the latest trend. I was resistant to TikTok for a long time. Now I'm like, I'm a consumer of TikTok, I'd say. I'm not a creator there yet. But that's a channel that I was like, oh, it's, feels like it's, trendy and it's a lot of like younger people and, it's not for me. And then now it's like I'm on TikTok all the time. So
I know, shit, man. I like the freaking, first of all, my nanny taught me who's like a Gen Z, told me that I should be calling it the clock
app. Yeah.
This is going to make me look so uncool. She was like, why are you calling it TikTok? You should call it the clock. But I was so resistant to TikTok. I remember going like in 2020, going on TikTok, being like, I'm not going to dance. I just don't. I'm not going to do, I'm a therapist. Like, I'm not going to dance. And then finally I was like, okay, I think this app is here to stay. Even when people were like, there was all the lawsuits and is it going to get banned in the States? I was like, just no way. I don't believe it's going to be banned. Maybe it is, but I don't believe it. And I finally surrendered and started to build a following on TikTok because I was like, I think this is here and the next generation of therapists are here. And, so let's dive into the clock, right?
Yeah. I mean, what I've seen over time is that like organic reach on these channels, like becomes more and more difficult as they get like more and more users. Right. And so that happened with Facebook. It became a pay to play platform. I think we're seeing it on Instagram as well. With TikTok, it feels like you can still get really great organic reach. And there's like, I know people who within like 3 months have 20,000 followers on TikTok, which is wild. Like you wouldn't be able to do that on, on Instagram today in the same way. So I think there's an opportunity to, grow a following and reach people more organically on TikTok.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, it's always hard with like new apps, right? Like it's like you take this leap. Like, do you join the new app and be an early adopter so you grow a following quicker? Or do you see if the app is established? And like, I never know. Like I joined Lemonade. Like, let's just say I don't even know where Lemonade is anymore. But, or God, what was the other one? I'm blanking on it. So some come and they die and then some stay, and you don't always know.
Yeah. And going back to email, right? Like email is not going anywhere. And so these channels, like, I think it's fine to experiment on them and see if you like them or not.
Yeah.
And, if you're investing there, like definitely be driving people to your email list and getting them on your list because, like we've talked about, the channels can change or their algorithms can change. And now you spend all this time building this audience that like, you can't access or they don't see your stuff.
Right.
So I always try to think about like, okay, how is this content that I'm posting on social media? One is like, how is it raising awareness, right, of my brand, but also like, how is it moving people from social into either to my website or onto my email list?
Right. I love it. So if anyone has been listening to this podcast episode, I hope that you take away, go home and start an email list. If you do nothing else, sign up and think about serving your ideal audience. But one caveat to that, I think we talked about off camera, was this idea of like for solo private practice therapists, where do you think that the email marketing falls? Like, what do you think is helpful or not?
It's a great question. I think we'd be remiss to not discuss the ethical concerns around email marketing as well, right? Like as therapists, we want to make sure we're not like emailing our clients through non-HIPAA compliant email. We're not like emailing them if they're responding to a newsletter, for example. I would say as a solo therapist in private practice, having an email newsletter where you're like sending updates, could be monthly, about your business, sharing, a blog post that you've written,
resources.
Yeah, is a great way not just to connect with potential clients, but also with other therapists, just to let them know like what's going on. I think it also reinforces, who you are, the types of clients that you serve, your niche. It's just a great way to like build, more kind of exposure and to get your name out there. I would say that email becomes a really valuable channel if you have other income streams in your business. So if you're offering courses or if you're doing events, for example, or you're selling products, like you have downloadables, things like that. Like you mentioned, like email sales, right? Like email is a great conversion channel. People buy from emails. If you just think about your own behavior as a consumer, like how many times have you bought something because you got an email about it, right? Versus like something you saw on social media and you're like, oh, that looks cool, but you just kind of keep scrolling, right?
Right.
So I think for sure, folks who have products to sell, or if you're just interested in potentially selling something in the future. When I started my email newsletter, Therapy Marketer, I didn't have like an end game of I'm going to build this, this email list, and then I'm going to convert, these subscribers into customers. It was more of I'm going to build this audience. I'm going to deliver value to them. And then in the future, if I do have something that I'm offering, I have this audience to sell it to, right? Also, it's enabled me to sell sponsorships of my newsletter to companies who are interested in reaching that audience too, right? So it just opens up opportunities. I think it's worth investing in. And I think it's really valuable for, if you're looking as a way to sell other income streams, like a book, for 100%. Example, in the future, if you are interested in writing a book, like having a newsletter already is great.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think more and more therapists are realizing the value of having an audience, even if you're not thinking of selling something right away. And in fact, I think that's actually a much better place to start. I think I see people put the cart in front of the horse where they have a product and they don't have an audience or they don't have an email list. And I always say, like, how do you know that the people who are going to become your audience want to buy that thing? Maybe it's something else that they want to buy and we haven't thought of it yet, So I think I think that's all a good point. So I could talk to you for a really long time. We're going to have to wrap up. So if you could give anyone who's starting a private practice kind of one piece of advice from all of your experience. I totally didn't email you this question.
Oh, man.
What would you tell people? Like, what do you think is the most important part of marketing yourself as a therapist?
I think that most therapists who struggle with marketing don't have a marketing problem. They have an audience problem. And I'm a huge proponent of niching down. I know you are as well. I think that there's, if you are a generalist in your private practice and you like to work with a variety of clients, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think that if you do have a more specific niche and population that you serve, it just makes your marketing so much easier. It's easier to create content. It's going to resonate with that target population.
Yeah, it's so much richer.
And so I think if you're listening and you're wondering, like, how do I get clients? Marketing has been so frustrating. No one's reaching out. That's where I would start. Like, who am I really serving? Who do I want to work with? And then with that in mind, look at your website, your directory profiles, your content, and ask yourself, like, am I really speaking to that client? And if you're not, then there's a mismatch there. And that's where I would start.
Okay, Michael. First of all, it was so nice to have you on. We're going to have you on again to just talk about all things private practice marketing, because I could pick your brain for 3 hours. How can people how can they sign up for the newsletter? Now that we've been talking about it, what do they need to do?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'd love to come back on for 3 hours. I don't know if people would want to listen
for that long. Maybe if they're driving.
We'll do an extended version. Yeah. So if you go to therapymarketer.co, that's my newsletter. You can also just put in, Therapy Marketer in Google. It should pop up. And I'm also on social media. Just my handles are my name, just Michael Fulwiler. So you can find me. I'm most active on Twitter, but also on LinkedIn and Instagram as well.
Awesome. And we'll put it all in the show notes so people can just click it. I'd really encourage you to sign up. So much valuable content for therapists. And we'll have you on again soon.
Thank you.
Ask Kelley Anything is just around the corner. But first, a word from our sponsor. Stay tuned for Kelley's response to your private practice questions.
Therapists, do you want more clients at your full cash rate? Mentaya is a platform that navigates out-of-network benefits for clients. They get clients on average 70% back on therapy by filing claims and chasing down insurance companies. They handle literally everything so that you can focus on what matters. Click the link in the show notes to learn more and get 1 month free using the code PRO.
On this week's Ask Kelley Anything, we have kind of a funny question. I'm excited for you to hear it, so let's play it.
Hi, my question is, if you and your husband are both counselors and one has already opened a private practice, is it wise to join together a spouse with one private practice or separate private practices? Thank you. Look forward to hearing responses.
Okay, so this person asked, I don't know why I'm laughing, but if your spouse already has a private practice and you are both therapists, is it wise to have a practice together? Now, anyone who's listening to this show might not know, my husband is actually a psychiatrist. And I will tell you that my bias right away is toward no. And that's for a variety of reasons. But I don't necessarily think that the answer that I'm going to give you is the only answer. Every couple has to decide what is right for them. So my personal experience is that my husband and I have actually never even worked on a case together. So even though he's a psychiatrist and I'm a therapist, and certainly it would be easy for us to work together, we have not worked with a single client together. And my reasoning for this actually comes from very early on in my experience of therapy, where I lived with one of my very best friends who is also a therapist, and we were roommates. And we lived together. I like to think I have pretty good boundaries, and actually she has really good boundaries too. And we had situations where we shared clients, or we were not shared clients, but we were on cases where maybe she was the family therapist and I was the teens therapist, or she saw a couple and I saw one member of the couple. And through the years, we had situations that came up, not very often, where we had clients in common. And even though we had really good boundaries, just the fact that we lived together meant that it was just too much when it came to also working together. And we weren't in a romantic relationship. We were just roommates and we were friends. And really quickly as that happened, I realized at that time my husband was in medical school and wasn't yet practicing. I said to myself, I never want to be in a situation where I might share a client with my husband, because it's already complicated when it comes to working with clients. And I don't want to complicate it further by thinking to myself, you know what, like maybe I would have handled this differently, maybe I wouldn't have, and that sort of thing. So my bias is I probably would never open a practice with my significant other. When Sam and I, my husband, first started out in our careers, I think in the back of our minds, we both thought maybe one day we'll open an office together. And I don't want to say never, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. As we've kind of evolved and grown into this field, we like our boundaries. We like to be able to come home and just watch Parks and Rec and kick back and not talk about work and not have to worry about kind of, are we performing in the right way or that sort of thing. So I would say no. That being said, I do know couples who have done this. And you want to check in with your state licensing board and the rules and regulations in your state to make sure that there aren't any laws that would prevent you from referring to your spouse and that sort of thing. Some states have different regulations around this. But I would say if you feel like your couple's relationship could navigate this well, then what I want you to think about is what would happen if you have a client and you guys were sharing them in some way, or you had some crossover and you disagreed about the approach. And I think that that would be a really important thing to kind of talk through when you're deciding whether or not it's wise to open a practice together. I tend to think business and family don't mix well together, but everyone's different. So I hope this helped.
Are you wondering how to promote and fill your private practice? Look no further. Kelley's comprehensive online course, Marketing for Therapists, will equip you with the essential marketing strategies to build a thriving six-figure therapy practice. Don't miss out on this opportunity for success. Check out the show notes to sign up.
If you would like to be featured on Ask Kelley Anything, I love getting listener questions from you guys. Anything about private practice goes. And the best way to do that is actually just to give me a call and leave me a question on my voicemail. So I'm going to tell you the phone number right now and make sure to write it down. Here it is, 805-243-8241. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.